Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Relics, Rumors, and Robbery by Tessa Bryant. Narrated by Rachel Leblang. Chapter 1. Someone, somewhere, once said the key to happiness was following your dreams, but Ruby Foster was fairly certain that person had never heard of bills, debt, or had to deal with the steadily increasing cost of living. In fact, the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that it must have been a rich, entitled man to have said something as stupid as, "Follow your dreams." Someone with just enough neurons to sound wise while actually being naive and egotistical. Yet somehow it had become one of those classic sayings people spouted off about in self-aggrandizing fashion or put on shirts like the one the girl standing in front of her was wearing. Ruby wanted to tap the girl, who couldn't be a day over 16, on the shoulder and tell her not to believe for a second that following her dreams would be as easy or simple as that old cliché made it seem. She didn't, of course, because she was in her 30s, and she remembered just enough about being a teen to know that the girl would only roll her eyes at any kind of wisdom Ruby dared try to pass on, and then call her crazy to all her friends. And the truth was, Ruby had heard enough rumors about herself and her crazy life choices to fill a book, and didn't need any news stories making the rounds. After all, who was she to give advice anyway? She wasn't some successful professional who had her life all figured out. Not even close. No, Ruby was a 32-year-old woman who had worked more dead-end jobs than she could count. She tried her hand at selling everything from candles and clothes to Range Rovers and real estate. She'd been a waitress, a barista, and a checkout girl. There had even been that one summer she drove a school bus. She hadn't been the kind of teenager, or even 20-something, who had known what her big dream even looked like. But there was a 0% chance it had been playing assistant, campaign manager, office receptionist, and all-around Girl Friday to the mayor of Tempest, Texas. It was a job she hated, mostly because she hated her boss, but also because she had finally figured out what her dream was and wanted to follow it. Only she couldn't, because she had bills to pay and needed the steady income to fund getting her dream job off the ground. Still, she couldn't wait for the day that she could tell Mayor McJerkface she was quitting. 6 months ago, Mallory Thorne had come home to Tempest. After 15 long years, Ruby's best friend was finally back where she belonged. She had remembered who she was, a powerful witch with a gift for touching objects and seeing their history, and after solving her own grandmother's murder, Mallory had asked Ruby to go into business with her. Bad Omen Investigations was their baby, a private investigation firm that would serve their magical little town and its supernatural residents who couldn't seek help in the normal world. From the first moment she'd heard Mallory's plans, Ruby had known that this was the purpose she'd been looking for all her life. She loved true crime podcasts. She loved being nosy and poking around in other people's business, even if she didn't like it when they did the same to hers. And, as horrible as the murder that had brought Mallory back to town had been, helping to solve the mystery of it had been more fun and far more fulfilling than anything else Ruby had ever done. Becoming a private eye had become more than just her big dream. It had become her reason for breathing. Finally, she felt like she was working towards something instead of just working to pay the bills and keep the lights on. She would be doing something with her life that could make a real difference. She could help keep Tempest, the little safe haven town where shifters like her and witches like Mallory and others in the supernatural world could live freely and openly, safe from those who wanted to destroy them. She would be helping her friends, family, and neighbors, and that was an accomplishment she could finally hold up in front of her parents and her pack and all of the others who had ever doubted her and say, "Look, I did good, and I did it my way." Or at least it might be if the business ever got off the ground. She and Mallory had spent the past 5 months working relentlessly to make their dream a reality. They'd poured their blood, sweat, and tears into turning the abandoned storefront on Main into a proper office. They'd also poured most of their money into the business because online classes to get an official private investigator license weren't cheap, and neither was office furniture, equipment, and supplies, or the rent and utilities on the place. Then there had been checks for new signage, business cards, flyers, and ads to promote their services. It had cost a small fortune, but Bad Omen Investigations was finally ready to open its doors. They could start taking cases any day now. And yet, Ruby still hadn't quit her job at Town Hall because she needed the guarantee of a steady paycheck to restore the savings she had depleted in her bid to follow her dreams. It was a real catch-22. She had finally found her calling, but she couldn't afford to quit the job she hated. Not yet. Not until the people in this town decided to take a chance and hire BOI, which was why she was waiting impatiently in line at the Green Door Diner for a campaign status update lunch that Mayor McJerkface insisted they have once a week. He was deep into planning his re-election campaign, and as his not-quite-eager assistant, that meant her workload had tripled, and all without a pay raise. She really needed to quit, and soon. The girl with the mocking shirt moved aside, finally, and Ruby stepped up to the counter to find a harried-looking Cora Green manning the register. Cora's parents owned and ran the diner, and since they were kitchen witches, the food was literally magic. Ruby knew Cora preferred to be in the back, cooking, or more preferably baking, instead of dealing with the midday rush, so she gave her friend a reassuring smile. Hey, just the usual. Thank you for always being so easy. Ruby snorted. Shh, don't say that so loud, people will talk. Cora rolled her eyes at the joke before retreating to grab a cup and filling it to the brim. When she returned, she passed over the cup that was now teeming with a delicious-looking strawberry milkshake that would undoubtedly taste exactly the same as it had every day since she was a child. Ruby grinned as she picked it up. Thanks. We'll get your food out to you soon, Cora promised before turning her attention to the next person in line. And what can I get for you today? Ruby glanced over at the familiar voice as he gave his order to Cora in a thick drawl, and then quickly looked away. The last thing she needed to add to this topsy-turvy day was a run-in with Billy Scholl. He and Ruby had never been close, not even back in high school when he dated Mallory, but for some reason he always tried to trap her in conversation. As quickly as she could, trying to go unnoticed, Ruby spun to head towards the back of the cafe. Only the moment she turned around, she ran smack into a broad chest. Her paper cup crumpled, smashed between her hand and the rock-solid body she'd crashed into. She yelped as cold ice cream spilled all over her, and she dropped the cup on instinct, causing it to splatter the remains of her shake everywhere when it hit the floor, adding to the giant mess. Seriously, Red? She cringed even before she heard the voice, because without looking up she knew exactly who she'd run into. She knew those shiny black shoes that he probably polished every night with a toothbrush to keep them gleaming. She knew the crisp gray slacks that hung from his thin waist as though they'd been specially tailored, because they probably had. And despite the fact she would deny it to her dying breath, she knew those broad shoulders and thick biceps because they'd appeared in her dreams, or what she preferred to think of as nightmares, on more than one occasion. Maybe try watching where you're going, he growled, and she jerked her gaze off his strawberry-stained white dress shirt to glare at him. Maybe don't sneak up behind a woman like some kind of creep, Nathaniel. She shot back with the name he hated since he insisted on calling her Red, a nickname that made her want to claw ribbons into his chest. Nate Carrington was a jerk, and it was ridiculous that she was the only one who seemed to realize it. The man was everything she despised. He was entitled, snobby, and bossy, and not just because he was her actual boss. Ruby had decided a long time ago that someone needed to pop the hot air balloon that was his ego often and repeatedly, and as the only woman in Tempest not enthralled by his dimpled smile and baby blues, the job fell to her. At this point, she considered it part of her job description to take him down a peg. "I wasn't sneaking up on you. I was about to tap you on the shoulder to tell you I was here." "Right, sure, because why would you simply wait for me to turn around and find you amid the crowd?" She snorted. "Oh, sorry, I forgot. You're Mr. Important. You don't wait for anyone or anything." He narrowed his eyes. "You're being ridiculous." "Oh, Ruby, honey." Cora's sweet voice cut in through their argument. "Take some napkins and clean yourself up. Don't worry about the mess on the floor. I'll get one of the guys to bring the mop out." "Thank you." Nate instantly turned his megawatt smile back to full wattage as he took the pile of napkins Cora offered over the counter. That smile of his only made Ruby angrier for some reason. He wielded it like a weapon, and she didn't like it being pointed at the younger woman. The last thing Cora needed was to develop a crush on the jerk who never dated anyone for more than a few weeks. Her friend deserved better. "Give me those." She grabbed the stack of napkins from him and began wiping at her dripping hands. She looked up long enough to hit him with another glare. "And you're buying me another shake." He scoffed. "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Red. Ridiculous. You ran into me, not the other way around." "You can afford it, Mr. Important." "If you insist on using my title, use it correctly. It's Mr. Mayor, for the record." He corrected, and she could hear the smile in his voice even without looking at him, which made her teeth grate. "For the record, I didn't vote for you last election cycle, and I don't plan to this time either." "And yet here you are, helping me with my campaign." "Because it's my job," she huffed as she swiped at her chest, trying to get as much of the strawberry ice cream off her shirt as she could. "Exactly. You're the employee, I'm the boss. You work for me." Ruby glanced up at his smug, too handsome face and wanted to damage it, irrevocably. "Remind me to give you my resignation letter when we get back to the office." "Funny." "Do I look like I'm laughing?" She quirked an eyebrow and watched with pleasure as his brows drew together in confusion. "Don't even think—" But before he could finish his sentence, the doors of the Green Door Diner flew open and the sound of a shotgun blast cut through the air. People screamed and scrambled out of the way. Particles from the ceiling rained down around them amid the chaos. 4 masked men carrying guns spread out around the doors, and Ruby blinked, trying to make the strange sight make sense. A big hand closed around her arm and jerked her backwards. She found herself pinned between Nate's big body and the counter. She wanted to snap at him, to tell him that she didn't need protecting, but something about the way he kept a tight grip on her, ensuring she was safely behind his shoulder, made her bite her tongue. "This is a robbery," the man who had shot into the ceiling announced loudly. "Don't do anything stupid and nobody will get hurt." "A robbery?" Ruby hissed in a whisper. "In Tempest?" Nate turned his head enough to shoot her a look, and she expected him to tell her to hush, but he didn't. He looked as confused as she did, and, of course, why wouldn't he be? Nobody in Tempest was dumb enough to rob the Green Door Diner, especially during the lunch hour rush, not when nearly every single patron in the place was some kind of supernatural being. Guns or no guns, the robbers didn't have the upper hand here. Only they didn't seem to know it. Ruby raised a brow and almost smiled when Nate gave a small nod of his chin, signaling they were on the same page. His grip on her loosened, but she didn't immediately pull away. Her wolf had sensed the danger and was already lurking just beneath her skin, but when Nate's wolf also rose up, it took every ounce of willpower Ruby had to keep her animal half from rubbing against him. Power radiated off of him as his eyes turned gold, his wolf lunging for the surface, and a growl tore out of his throat, so menacing that the hair on Ruby's arms stood on end. Her heart raced, and she let go of the tether she used to rein in her own wolf. Her wolf clawed for the surface, desperate to follow Nate's wolf into this battle. It had been a long time since they'd changed together, longer still since they'd fought together, but side by side, they couldn't lose. Only for the second time in as many minutes, shock and horror slammed into Ruby. Her eyes darted to Nate, and she saw the same look in his pale blue gaze. There wasn't even a hint of gold there anymore. No sign of his wolf. He wasn't shifting, couldn't shift, and she knew it because she could feel the same net wrapping around her own wolf and holding it down, inside of her, unable to break free. What kind of magic was this? Chapter 2. Ruby's wolf was angry and scared. She couldn't comprehend what was happening any more than Ruby could. She wanted to break free of Ruby's skin and protect them, but something was holding her back, and a whimper escaped her throat before Ruby could bite it back. Fear slithered down her spine when the man with the shotgun turned her direction at the sound of her wolf's whine. She couldn't shift. Her wolf was trapped inside of her, and though Nate had moved to protect her, she knew he was as worried as she was at that moment. For the first time in her life, Ruby didn't just feel powerless. She was powerless, and if she had to guess by the stunned expressions of the others in the restaurant, she wasn't the only one. Something or someone was holding their magic at bay. She knew for a fact that she and Nate couldn't shift, which likely meant none of the shifters in the room could. She shot a glance at Cora, who stood frozen behind the counter. She'd raised her hands as if she were going to cast, but the confused expression on her face said it all. Her magic was bound inside of her as well. Ruby had thought that the robbers were crazy for coming into the diner where supernaturals gathered en masse, but they'd known what they were walking into and been well prepared. The robbers had disarmed them all before they'd even realized what was happening. This was bad. Really bad, and for reasons she didn't want to think about too much, she was glad that Nate was there with her, and she wasn't alone. "You trying to shift, wolf girl?" The man in the mask taunted as he came closer. "Think you can take us on? Try it without your animal half. I dare you." Ruby narrowed her eyes, trying to discern if she knew the man behind the mask. He knew her, at least enough to know she was a wolf shifter. But she didn't recognize the voice, and the masks the robbers wore weren't the cheap ski kind. There was black mesh over the eye area that allowed them to see out, but that kept even their eyes hidden in darkness from anyone trying to look in. Ruby searched him for an identifying marker, a tattoo peeking from beneath a shirt collar, or a specific scar, anything she could use to identify him. But he was fully clothed, top to bottom. He wore the mask, which covered his head completely. The overalls he wore were black, too. Tactical looking, but with no visible tags or branding. The sleeves were tucked into gloves, and the bottom of the pants were tucked into dusty black combat boots. Not an inch of skin was visible, and there was nothing about the outfit that looked remotely familiar. "Leave her alone." Nate more fully blocked her with his own body when the man stepped closer with his gun. "Oh, we got a hero on our hands, boys." The man pointed the gun at Nate's chest, and Ruby felt her heart stop for a paralyzing second before he shifted it away again. "Mr. Mayor still thinks he's in charge here." "Show him he ain't." One of the other robbers laughed, and Ruby wanted to turn her attention to him to see what the others were doing, but she couldn't because this one, the one in front of them, was practically vibrating with excitement. And that scared her. He was enjoying this, not just robbing them, but having them at his mercy. He had the power and the gun, and they were helpless. He knew it. Just like Ruby knew without needing to see his face or look into his eyes that he had every intention of abusing that power. "You're not the heir or the mayor right now. You're just a guy who's about to lose the thing you value most." "Don't you dare," Nate started, but he didn't get a chance to finish his sentence because the robber swung the butt of the gun forward, slamming it into his stomach. Nate doubled over, air whooshing from his lungs and causing him to cough. Ruby grabbed for him to keep him on his feet, but the robber shoved her backwards. He kicked Nate's feet out from under him while he was still trying to get his breath, and he landed hard with a crack on the tile floor, before Ruby could steady herself and reach for him again. "Stay down," the man warned when Nate put his hands on the floor and tried to push himself back up. "I said, stay down." "Stop it," Ruby screamed as he stomped on Nate's hand. "Stop it. Leave him alone." "Shut up," the robber hissed at her, moving the gun to point it at her face. "Shut up and get on your knees." Ruby held her hands in front of her, trying to show him she was at his mercy. Okay, fine. We're not fighting you. Take what you want. You said nobody had to get hurt." "I lied." Ruby couldn't see his face, but she would have sworn on the lunar cycle he was smiling beneath that mask. She shot a look at Nate and felt anger surge inside of her. Her wolf wasn't whining now. She was howling and clawing, trying to find a way to break free of the net holding her in place. Ruby grit her teeth as she slid to her knees beside Nate. She might not like him very much, but Nate Carrington was more than just her boss, more than just the mayor of their little town. He was the heir to the Moonlight Pack, the pack she had been born into. Nate's father was the current Pack Alpha, but Nate had been groomed to lead them all his life, and someday, maybe even someday soon, he would be the most powerful shifter in the pack in addition to the most powerful man in Tempest. Ruby might have distanced herself from the pack over the years, but that didn't mean she liked seeing her future alpha brought low. Her wolf recognized Nate's position in the hierarchy and couldn't stand the sight of him on the ground. She wanted to tear the man who was crushing his hand to pieces and deliver his head to Nate on a pike. But she couldn't shift, which meant she couldn't help him. Not unless she could reach the knife that she kept in her boot. Her friends made fun of her for always having the knife on her. After all, she was a born wolf shifter. She had fangs and claws if she needed protection. They'd always said the knife was a bit overkill and more about a style choice than actual safety. But this situation, as strange and unlikely as it was, proved that she needed to know how to protect herself even when her wolf couldn't be called upon. "That's a fancy ring you've got, Mr. Mayor," the robber chuckled under his breath. "I think I'll take it." "No," Nate growled and tried to squirm free, but the man put the barrel of the gun to his head. "Take it off." "Never," Nate spat just before Ruby heard the cracking of his bones as the robber stomped his booted foot harder on Nate's hand. The robber bent over to pry the ring from Nate's hand himself, and Ruby took the opportunity to slide her hand down to the top of her boot. He wasn't paying attention to her at that moment. Nate wasn't giving his family ring up easily, and it was all the distraction she needed. She moved as fast as she could, reaching inside her boot to the secret built-in pocket where she kept a switchblade at all times. She jerked it out and flicked her wrist to open it in one smooth move. She was already leaning forward to stick the blade into the robber's throat when a big hand grabbed her wrist and twisted it violently. She screamed in pain as the bone broke and her hand spasmed, causing her to drop the knife. She heard it hit the tile floor before a booming voice drowned everything else out. "That was really stupid." A second robber, who she hadn't noticed approaching them, loomed over her now. "We weren't supposed to hurt you, but you just can't help but cause trouble, can you?" Her brain whirled, trying to place the voice of this masked man, but the pain reverberating up her arm was too distracting. Normally, whenever she'd been hurt, her shifter genes kicked in and began healing her almost instantly. Not this time, though. This time, her wolf was trapped, bound by a magic she couldn't see or break through, and Ruby felt every excruciating ounce of pain that radiated up her broken arm. She felt dizzy with it, like she might throw up. But before she could, another voice broke through the fog.
"Stay with me, Red. You're strong. Breathe through it."
She blinked until Nate's face came into view, and she realized, belatedly, that she'd fallen face forward onto the floor, and now lay beside him. She hadn't felt the impact, hadn't realized the robber had let her go, or that she was even falling. Everything hurt, but she could just make out Nate's face and his voice through the chaos happening all around them and inside her head. There were multiple men arguing above her now, and she tried to turn over to see them better.
"You weren't supposed to hurt her,"
the first man screamed in the face of the second.
"I saved your life. She had a knife and you weren't paying attention. I was getting what we came for. Shut up."
A third voice joined the fray.
"Did you get it?"
"Right here." The first man held something up, and the new one gave a nod.
"Good. We got the wallets and cleaned out the register, too. Let's go."
The last man to turn away to leave was the one who had taken Nate's ring, and Ruby reached out with her good arm, grabbing at his shoelaces, trying to trip him. He kicked out at her, and she tried to cringe back, but it was too late. His boot collided with the side of her face, sending her reeling. She screamed in pain as the taste of blood coated her tongue. She heard Nate scream, too, but she couldn't make out what he said, because in the next instant the boot connected with her ribs and sent her spinning. She gasped as the air rushed out of her. She tried to suck in a breath, but it felt like her ribs were broken. She couldn't quite catch her breath, and darkness was seeping in at the edges of her vision.
"I said let's go,"
someone yelled, and there was the sound of running, and then more chaos as the patrons who had been frozen in place began to reach for their friends and loved ones.
"Ruby."
She heard Nate's voice again, but she had her eyes squeezed shut in an attempt to block out the pain.
"Ruby, stay with me. It's okay. It's going to be okay."
She was coherent enough to hear him yell for someone to call the hospital, but she wasn't sure it was worth it. She had the oddest feeling that she was dying. Everything hurt. She was bleeding. She could feel her own bones sitting at odd angles, and she couldn't get enough air into her lungs. It was strange, but a sense of peace settled over her at the thought. If she was going to die, at least she'd gone out fighting. She had stood up for herself and for her future Pack Alpha. She had tried to stop the bad guys, and that had to count for something, right? Maybe they'd put something nice on her tombstone, at least.
"Ruby, breathe."
Nate was in her face again.
"Breathe. You have to keep breathing, even if it hurts."
She whimpered, but did as he said, pulling more air into her lungs despite the pain that ripped through her midsection. She wanted to grumble about him being bossy, but she didn't have the energy. Particularly not when she thought she was taking her last breaths and he was gently stroking her hair, as if they hadn't been at each other's throats for the last 2 decades. It felt nice, actually, so she kept her eyes closed and focused on the calm that was settling inside of her. Then, as if whatever spell had bound the magic inside of her had broken, a rush of heat and fire burned through her veins. Ruby screamed, her eyes flying open. Nate was there to catch her when she nearly sat bolt upright. He caught her and held her down as her wolf hissed and the magic of the bond with her animal began to course through her body again, repairing the damage that had been done.
"It hurts, I know. Just breathe."
Nate looked like he was in pain too, but she couldn't deal with worrying about him at that moment.
"Call Luke,"
she breathed through the pain. "Someone needs to call Luke."
"Cora did. As soon as the robbers left. He's on his way. The cops in the ambulance, too. We're going to be okay."
She closed her eyes again, content to grit her teeth through the pain as her body stitched itself back together. Now that she knew she wasn't dying, that her wolf wouldn't let her die, she needed to focus on healing. Her brother, the sheriff, was on his way, and he'd have questions. He'd be determined to hunt down and arrest the men who had robbed the diner and hurt Ruby, Nate, and possibly numerous others. But he wasn't going to get the chance to arrest anyone, because Ruby was going to find them first, and she was going to make them pay for making her feel helpless. Just as soon as she was back on her feet, she was going to find them, and she was going to let her wolf rip them to shreds.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?